Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business, politics, and criminal justice reform today. So we're really excited to welcome the CEO of the Just Trust, Anna Zamora, to be with us today for a conversation. No one better. So good to see you.
Oh,
How are you?
so good to see you, Ken. Thank you so much for having me on. I feel very honored to be on here with you and excited to talk about my most favorite topic in the world, which is, of course, criminal justice reform.
I mean, amazing. And it wasn't until we had Leslie Odom Jr. that you agreed to do this. So I'm honored that
Yeah,
you.
that was
you
incredible, by the way.
oh my God.
Congratulations. I
Oh,
am a huge fangirl.
Oh, amazing. Well, it's so good to see you. And I think it's a perfect way to kind of start is just kind of like a little bit more on like your origin story. Like, what was your background? And Just Trust is a new organization. Like, what led you to kind of create it?
Yeah, well, Ken, for as long as I can remember, I've been really, really driven by one mission, to make the criminal justice system in the United States actually live up to its promise of both safety and justice. I really believe that public safety and the rule of law are kind of cornerstones of a functioning society. And but they're only really part of the story. What makes our country truly remarkable are the ideals that set us apart, our freedoms, our liberties, and the deep compassion and dignity that define humanity. Balancing these principles isn't just a challenge, it's our shared responsibility and one I've dedicated my career to tackling. And interestingly, it wasn't until actually recently, a year or two ago, that I really came to terms with and started talking publicly about my own story. I was raised in Portland, Oregon, and my older brother cycled in and out of jail and prison while I was a little girl. It was kind of one of those things where he was a young kid who wanted to be cool. Like, who doesn't want to be cool? And unfortunately, he started hanging out with the wrong crowd and started getting into trouble. And sooner than later, he was kind of revolving in and out of jail and prison for all silly things, smoking marijuana, breaking and entering, dumb stuff. And the problem is my parents didn't know what to do. My parents, my parents who were an immigrant family, incredibly proud, trying really hard to live the American dream and to be the ideal immigrant family. Anybody who's an immigrant knows what I'm talking about. And for my parents, this was like devastating to see their son, their firstborn, who had my father's name, right, get into trouble like this with the law. And my parents didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, what our society does is it gives parents in this horrible predicament one thing to do, which is criminal justice. And so they had to call the police multiple times and have my brother arrested. And this was devastating on my family. And we buried it. We didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So this experience growing up and seeing my brother and my family go through this, wasn't consciously why I started working on this, but it certainly has been a huge part of why I've stayed. And just to be clear, I'm not like special or unique because I have an older brother who
Yeah.
cycled in and out of jail and prison. This is like a very American experience.
Yeah.
One like half of people in this country have a family member who has been to jail or prison at some point. I mean, that's a horrific statistic. So that's really my origin story.
It's amazing. And then you decided to kind of create the Just Trust. I mean, how and what, and I think more appropriately, like what lane do you want to kind of fill? Because criminal justice reform is just such a big topic. It's something we've talked to in the past with, law enforcement folks and with advocacy folks and, leaders in government and so on. So like, how do you kind of such a behemoth?
Yeah, well, so first and foremost, what is the Just Trust? The Just Trust is a funding intermediary, and our mission is to ensure that the next chapter of criminal justice reform in America is nimble, adaptable, well-funded, and able to make progress through the inevitable pendulum swings of
Yeah.
politics and culture. And why I ended up starting the Just Trust really had to do with my career in advocacy. I got my start as an administrative assistant supporting lawyers who were defending people on death row. And I was really thrust into this work. And, at the belly of the beast, the bowels of death row. And I really learned about the whole criminal justice system. And I kind of moved through my career. I worked at the ACLU for many years as an advocate and learned about how change happens, how laws change, and how to kind of build coalitions and bring folks together to talk about how to make change in these spaces. But one thing I also learned about during my experience as an advocate is how important philanthropy is to
Yeah.
this work. And frankly, and hopefully I'm not going to offend anybody who might be listening in, but I was really frustrated with philanthropy. I
Yeah.
thought that the way philanthropy invested in criminal justice reform was actually doing a lot of good, but also holding us back in some interesting ways. And so I kind of said, I want to change this. And this is when I went into philanthropy and I joined the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to help them build their criminal justice reform giving program. And all of a sudden, I found myself working in an incredible institution with
Yeah.
resources, A,
Yeah.
but B, with different people from different walks of life, computer scientists and people that were, healthcare professionals. And I got a chance to work with new folks and bring new thinking, thought leadership into this process. And I was able to incubate a strategy while I was at CZI that would later become an independent organization, which is the Just Trust.
Amazing.
And, I'm very grateful that that vision, somebody saw something in that vision,
Yeah.
in particular the leadership of Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and they invested $350 million to allow me to build the organization that I now run.
It feels so timely. Like it feels like a genuine time of disruption, right? It's just like I think everyone's kind of questioning just the process of how things have been done. I saw it firsthand. We talked about, in one of our prep calls, like my aunt was a Commonwealth attorney in Virginia and she was a prosecutor, right? And she was able to kind of pursue some reform-minded issues while violent crime went down, right? So
That's
it's
right.
not a mutually exclusive thing. And I think people are actually like questioning this kind of notion of like what your parents went through of, well, this is just how it is, right? Like doesn't
Yeah.
need to be, right? So it's like talk a little bit more about that and like, because I feel like you're in the disruptive mode and how you use these new resources, right? Like, are you finding programs nationally that have done well that you can scale, or how are you connecting dots?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, at the foundation of this is really, I believe this country has the potential to become a real leader in both criminal justice and public safety innovation.
Yeah.
And right now we're really pretty much the worst. And many countries look to us and emulate our harsh our harsh policies and
Yeah.
practices that are really focused on punishment for the sake of punishment. And I believe and I want this country to finally model something better and more innovative to the world. And I think we as Americans want and deserve that. And so I believe we can do that. But it takes a lot of resources and it takes a lot of collaboration. And I just want to throw out just to really root the problem
Yeah.
here. I mean, because I think it's important for people to understand the scale of what we're talking about. We have 1.9 million men, women, and children incarcerated in this country in our jails and prisons. And that's a lot. Another kind of statistic, and I'm not big on numbers, but I just bear with me on these. Another one that really gets me, as a stepmother, nearly half of all Americans, excuse me, I said that one already, didn't I? An estimated 5 million children have at least one parent incarcerated during their lifetime. Our policies and practices that are supposed to be keeping us safe are actually perpetuating cycles of violence, harm, and trauma, and we have to do better. So that's part of the why here. And one thing I want to be really clear about, Ken, that what I'm talking about here is a whole different ball game from what I think many people associate with traditional criminal justice reform. I think that some, and perhaps some folks that are listening right now, think that people like me, criminal justice reformers, are working to delegitimize and ultimately dismantle the institutions that comprise the justice system, our police, our jails and prisons, our prosecutors, etc. While there are some, of course, and some perhaps really loud voices who are trying to do that, most of our work, and certainly my work and the work of my organization, is actually about creating a proactive vision for a justice system that works better for everyone, one that is part of cultivating safety and thriving communities. And so I just feel like it's really important to
Yeah.
make that distinction. So just to put a finer line, it means yes, police, but it means better trained and adequately resourced police. It means yes, prisons exist, but that these prisons aren't a catch-all for everything, and our prisons actually give people an opportunity to choose a different path. And it means, yes, we have laws, we have crimes, we have punishments, but, right now we have too many of those. The list of state and federal crimes is huge and really complicated. And, your average person doesn't really understand what constitutes illegal behavior. These are the things we need to tackle. And these are the things through our work at the Just Trust that we're trying to tackle one day at a time,
Yeah.
incrementally.
So blank slate.
Mhm.
You've been hired to kind of create the justice system. Like putting aside all the challenges today, like how should we run it, right? Like I feel like you're in this thread of kind of advocacy around smaller, more adaptive, nimble, just like what does that mean to you? Like what is an ideal justice system?
Well, I think an ideal justice system is one that, I mean, this is how I simply
Yeah.
put it, right? One that has a narrower funnel into incarceration. The reality is, right now, we have, like I just said, over criminalization. There's a lot of laws on the books between our federal system and all of our state systems that criminalize a lot of human behavior. And most of us don't even know what is a crime and what is it. So the result of that is that there's a huge funnel into the justice system, which is why
Yeah.
we see so many people incarcerated and why we see that revolving door. So first of all, we need to narrow the funnel in by addressing the mass explosion of criminal laws that this country has seen over the last 50 years, 50 plus years. I believe that there are things that shouldn't be crimes, and I certainly believe that there are things that are better addressed outside of the criminal justice system. For example, serious mental illness,
Mhm.
people who suffer from substance use disorder, people who are poor and can't get a leg up, right? Like those are just some
Yeah.
examples, but there's a lot of things. There's a big funnel in. So narrow the funnel into prison for individuals who do need to be incapacitated and incarcerated, which I believe that there is a role for that. The experience of incarceration needs to be fundamentally different.
Yeah.
It needs to be a place that can really offer a lot of different programming, educational programming, workforce programming, therapy, yoga. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of yoga. I think it has amazing benefits. The point is like the experience of
Yeah.
prison needs to be fundamentally different in this country so that it gives people every opportunity to choose a different path. And then finally, we need to expand the funnel out of that situation for people who have
Mhm.
chosen a different path and who have taken advantage of programs. We need to get them out of there and
Yeah.
help support them in reuniting with their families and being the best parents they can be.
Mhm.
Getting a job and earning a living that can help them live the American dream,
Yeah.
right? These are things that right now we're not doing a good job of.
Yeah.
And my institution, my organization, the Just Trust, is trying to, through the different levers we pull, which are oh, I hate it when that happens. Hooray for the Just
Oh,
Trust.
there be.
God, so embarrassing. Um, so just really quickly, we kind of have five core
Yeah.
capacities: philanthropic advising and fundraising, very
Mhm.
important, grant making, impact and measurement, advocacy strategy and advising, public opinion and messaging research, and narrative change.
Yeah.
So we kind of use those three levers to start to tackle these problems.
Love it. And I want to get into the mechanics of those things, but just getting back to kind of, I think it's worth just like focusing a little bit more on this kind of funnel, right? Because it's like, I think society views like, oh, you did a crime and going to jail, like, and that's where the justice system ends. But it's not. once you're in the system, the detrimental impact that has on you, like because you're not learning, you're not advancing, you're not getting better skills, and that
Yeah.
experience is just horrid. And then the funnel out, credit, background, job, employment, ability to contribute to society is just like how much worse off have we created the system, right? So it's like
Yeah.
inherently it doesn't feel like our system today is one that makes us safer. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like it's making the folks who are doing wrong better at the end of the day either, right? So it's like so
Yeah.
daunting. And I mean, so you're trying to focus in all three kind of buckets.
We are no
Yeah,
recognizing that addressing all of that is one, a lot,
yeah,
and two, the ebbs and to my earlier point that I said at the outset, the ebbs and flows of politics and culture make some of that work harder at different times. But you're absolutely right, Ken. I mean, I think that we have to look holistically at the whole system, at the funnel in, the experience during, and the funnel out. And I believe there's some obvious changes that we can make throughout. And I do believe, and it's not just a belief, it's like proven with public opinion
yeah,
research, the vast majority of Americans across these ideological divides that have been so, acute lately,
yeah,
that people agree. People agree that we should not send people suffering from serious mental illness into incarceration. People agree that we should have
yeah,
rehabilitative programs, and people agree that once you've done your time, you should be able to get a job and you should be able to get housing and things like that. It's
yeah.
kind of basic. But one thing that I really want to put a fine point in that I believe, and that is often kind of not talked about enough in the criminal justice reform space, is accountability.
Yeah.
You know, punishment is not accountability. Punishment is punishment. Accountability is helping somebody who has made a mistake or harmed somebody else or society, right? To understand that harm and to be accountable to it. And accountability is, I don't think, something that our criminal justice system
Yeah.
actually does at all. And I think that it's a core tenet of how we improve public safety and, importantly, how we prevent crime before it happens. And when it does happen, how we make sure it doesn't happen again, which
Yeah.
is something our criminal justice system right now is really bad at doing. Crime, crime happens all the time again, as we know from
Yeah.
the rate at which people return back into prison after committing new crimes.
And one of the other things that I've always been shocked about is just like the staggering resource allocation and economic impact of our current system. Just like the waste in it, right? Like,
Yeah,
spend a
I
little bit of
mean,
time thinking about like dollars used to incarcerate people that could be used for programs and other
yes.
kind of effort, right? Like just like the dollar magnitude, right? We have a
Yeah,
big
I mean,
private
look,
sector audience. Like it's not only like the right thing to do to actually kind of like help people, it makes us safer if we approach it differently. And economically, we're not looking to add on additional resources, right? With the existing amount being spent, right? I mean,
well, you raise an interesting point. I think there's a lot of talk about the cost of our criminal justice system. It's a staggering number. And a lot of times, criminal justice reformers like myself, and I have certainly done this in my
yeah,
career, we have used that cost as an argument. Like, look at this taxpayer waste, right? Um, and I certainly think that that number is big and that it is going to lift up a system that punishes for the sake of punishment and doesn't really deliver on its promise of safety and justice. But I don't actually think that those costs are unwarranted. I think, because I believe that in ensuring public safety and public order is such an important function of government and community and society, I actually think we have to spend a lot of money
yeah,
to ensure that those things are happening. But I think where that money is spent is what we need to scrutinize. And I think we need that money to be spent in ways that are proven to prevent crime before it happens, when crime happens, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I don't think we are spending that staggering amount of taxpayer dollars right now in a way to do that. I think we're spending it in a way to punish people, remove them from their families, and to criminalize essentially all human behavior. And
Yeah.
that's not, doesn't make sense. And it's not right. And, and I care about things that are
Sure.
immoral too.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think it's immoral and it's just downright dumb.
Yeah. So I feel like you're such a good storyteller. Talk a little bit about just like the role you all play on just the shaping of the narrative and storytelling and kind of this distinction of like you're not for kind of like no criminal oversight, right? You're for true accountability and reform, right? Like how much of your time is spent as an organization just on kind of like framing of the narrative and storytelling?
A lot. I think it's really important. And I think it's important right now too. I think, this work is complicated and certainly we have to address our criminal laws. So we spend a lot of time funding and doing advocacy at the state, local, state, national level to really change our criminal laws. And we have the great privilege as a funding intermediary, we have the great privilege of being able to resource organizations across the country. Small organizations in West Virginia working on this to big national organizations that are working on this, across the country. We get to resource those organizations, which is like one of the greatest
Yeah.
privileges in my career. And the ecosystem of organizations that comprise the criminal justice reform space is incredible. So that's important, but as we like to say at the Just Trust, you can't just change laws without also changing hearts. And I think a big part of the narrative work that we have to do is right now, if you go and you ask most anybody, like, what do you do if somebody commits a crime? The first thing that will pop into their head is a jail cell. It is so baked into our DNA
Yeah.
in this country that the only response to crime is incarceration. And the reality is there's so many other interventions. That should be, I believe, a last resort. There's so many other interventions, that can come into play before crime happens and after crime happens that can help us get to where we want to go. And we need to help the public, help our country understand that there's so many interventions that we should be lifting up and we should integrate them into our current criminal justice system. From policing, right?
Yeah.
Like one perfect example is there are so many incredible local programs across the country that pair civilian responders with the kind of training for crisis intervention, pair them with local law enforcement so that local law enforcement isn't tasked with,
Yeah.
responding to every single problem. These trained first responders come first. And if things get heated and if they need help, if things are getting scary, that's when law enforcement comes in and helps. But that doesn't happen very
Yeah.
often, frankly. And so those kinds of things, those kinds of interventions and that kind of innovation is what we need to help the American public see are not only happening and working, but we have to scale them in order to really see the kind of safety outcomes that we want.
Incredible. And I think one of the important things about your organization is this kind of nonpartisan approach from your board to your efforts. Talk a little bit about how important that is and kind of this is not a ideologically, politically motivated kind of, organization you've created.
No, I mean, we live in a time of deep political division, and the only way to make progress in
Yeah.
this country is through compromise and through bringing people together and looking at where we're alike and where we agree and moving forward in that direction. So, there's a lot of words for this. The one that a lot of people know is bipartisanship, right? To me, bipartisanship means really bringing together Republicans and
Yeah.
Democrats and moving forward through compromise to achieve policy change. But it's not just bipartisanship.
Yeah.
We also have to recognize that these issues are happening in deep blue
Yeah.
California, which is a big state, and in Mississippi, and so we need to really bring together and build coalition across regional divides as well between urban and rural communities. We can't forget that these issues exist in rural communities too. They don't just exist in Chicago and Los Angeles and Manhattan. And so I really think about being that bridge builder, and bringing in diversity of voices. But back to the kind of political
Sure.
aspect of this, you know, I believe it's my responsibility as one of the largest funders in the criminal justice reform space. It's my responsibility to fund in a way to make sure that we can make durable and responsible progress on this issue, no matter who holds political power, no matter who sits in the governor's mansion, no matter who sits in the White House. If we position this issue through our funding to be divisive, to be
Yeah.
polarized, then we're never going to make durable progress. It's just the reality. And I think that this country deserves policy change and progress where there is consensus and there is compromise. I think that's the only way to make things stick.
Yeah. So let's just focus a little bit more on the political side. I'm here in Washington, obviously. And one of the things that President Trump focused on in his first term was actually criminal justice reform. So I'd love to kind of hear your insights as a new administration is coming into office, what you kind of hope to accomplish at the federal level, and also kind of what are your big priorities state and locally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm actually really hopeful. I mean, President Trump, during his first administration, to your
Yeah.
point, championed a federal bill called the First Step
Mhm.
Act. And, the First Step Act really drew inspiration from successful criminal justice reforms in states like Texas, Utah, Georgia, Kansas, South Carolina. These are all
Yeah.
red conservative states. And what the First Step Act did is essentially created pathways for people in federal prison to take advantage of rehabilitation programs and earn earlier release or other benefits. It's a huge body of work that did a lot of other things that I won't get into, but it was an incredible first step. And the leadership from Mr. Trump himself and from bipartisan leadership in DC was truly, truly incredible. It had 28 Republican sponsors. And at the end of the day, it had 264 Republicans from the US Congress voting in favor of the First Step Act. And so given that that was a key hallmark of the first Trump
Yeah.
administration, I think, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see something in the next 4 years around criminal justice reform, around responsible criminal justice reform. And what that is, I don't think we know yet,
Yeah.
but a lot of my colleagues in this space are really, really excited and trying to start those important conversations about what's the second
Yeah.
step? Where are we going to go next?
Fascinating. And you're going to be rolling out your own podcast in the new year as well, right? Tell us about that. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm nervous about it, but I'm very, very excited. It's called When It Clicked.
Oh,
It's coming out on January 11th, I believe. And, I really drew inspiration from you, Ken. Just having real conversations with real people who care about things and know a few things about something. I mean, I know a couple of things about criminal justice reform, but I certainly don't know everything. My podcast is really about talking to people about what they used to think about the criminal
yeah.
justice system, an experience that they had that made them think really differently. It's very simple,
Oh,
but
I
it's
love it.
about storytelling, and it's really based on my own experience of like I had this thing happen to me as a
Yeah.
kid and it really shaped my viewpoints on this work. So I'm excited.
Oh, and just on that for another second, I mean, I feel like you're in such a unique position because you are a resource allocator, right? So how
Yes.
have you been surprised by the amount of innovation in the space of criminal justice reform across the country? Like, I mean, how interesting or exciting is your day job from that perspective of like seeing things that maybe you hadn't even thought of or heard of or whatever? I mean, like, just
I,
curious.
yeah, I am. And it's exciting to be this is why I love philanthropy, because
Yeah,
philanthropy can experiment. Philanthropy can give us the kind of idea generation and experimentation and learning that government can then see like, oh, that worked. Let's
yeah,
let's do something. And then you need advocacy to then push government to do
yeah,
that, right? So it's really exciting. But we need a lot more. I said at the beginning that the Just Trust was seed funded with $350 million. That is an incredible historic amount of money. And I'm so grateful for it. And the reality is, this work is long, it's
yeah.
hard. We need a lot more experimentation and innovation and a lot more diversity of voices pushing government
Sure.
to think differently. And so, yes, I get to allocate resources.
Yeah,
And one of the most important things we do is we're trying to build a community of philanthropic leaders to join us in solving these problems. And so to me, that's one of the best parts of my job is I get to go out and talk to
yeah,
people who want to make change like me and want to try to help me figure this out,
amazing.
and support the incredible body of leaders and groups that are fighting for this stuff along with me every day.
So, like, regardless if you're in the private sector, in government and advocacy, you're someone that wants to talk to all those folks.
I do, and I really, if anybody's excited by anything I've said today, I encourage you to get involved. Like, now is the time to get involved. This issue is urgent, and it's really important, and we need more people at the table. And so, give me a call.
Love it.
If you, I mean, talk to Ken to get my number, I guess.
We will make sure.
But but yeah, come talk to me. I'm here. I'm here
Amazing.
to help, and I want to meet you.
Excellent. And look, just to close it out, right? Like we started our discussion about having you on Coffee with Ken like in the summer. And between then and now, you're in Western North Carolina. And it was devastated this fall from storms and just like epic kind of events. Just a few seconds on just like, how's the community doing? What needs are still out there? Because I feel like it's no longer on the front pages, but the need for support, as we've
Yeah.
talked about, is still very important in Western North Carolina. So I'd love just kind of your thoughts on what it's like and the rebuilding. I'm glad your roof's fixed and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really thank you, Ken. I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been tough. Hurricane Helene totally devastated my community here in Asheville, North Carolina. And it's going to be a long haul for recovery. Some of our basic infrastructure is back, thankfully, like our municipal water, power, internet, things like that. But the road to recovery for Asheville is going to take a while. There's still a lot of people that lost their homes. Businesses are really, really struggling. And so the local economy is going to take a hit, but we're resilient here. We're resilient. We live in the mountains, and so we're going to be okay. But if what we need, this is always the thing, right? What we need is money. I just want to call out our local food bank. Manna is incredible, feeds so many people before the hurricane, and now feeds so many people who need food. And so Manna is a place that I would highly encourage anybody who wants to help out to donate money to Manna to help us get through the holidays.
Oh, and we'll share that with folks listening. Anna, so good to see you. Thanks for doing this. Congratulations on all the great success and work you're doing. Happy holidays. Appreciate everyone tuning in. It's coffeewithken.com. You can obviously check out past episodes on our website, but also subscribe so you're up to date on what's coming next. So until next time, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Happy
Appreciate
holidays.
it. Happy holidays.